Well, hello everybody. Welcome back from the break. So I hope you got a little relaxation in and some refreshments as well. And so we're going to continue with our programming. We have a wonderful session that's about to begin. Should be very helpful to everyone who teaches or works with, in some way or another, with educating the public about the Holocaust. And so we're going to go for 1 hour from now until 3:15, and then we'll take a short 15-minute break, and then we're going to do a workshop for a small group of people upstairs, one floor up from here in a room 408. So actually, it's 2 floors up from here. I'm sorry, we're on second admin, where 2 floors up is the 4th floor. So we'll be there from 3:30 to 4:30. So let me tell you a little bit about our presenters. So we have Emily Loeb, who is from the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and she's been doing a lot of outreach, as we are, to local teachers, local schools, especially in the Pittsburgh area. And the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh is a fantastic resource for teachers throughout the region. Many of you know what they do. We were talking about Chutzpah earlier this morning, and Chutzpah is one of the publications that they support and promote. And so Emily will be accompanied by Nick Haberman. Nick was a longtime teacher at Shaler High School and now runs a program called the Light Initiative. And so in that capacity, Nick goes all over the region helping schools and teachers to implement Holocaust education. So Emily and Nick, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Jim. So as Jim mentioned, my name's Emily Loeb. I'm the Director of Programs and Education at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. And I'm going to give you a very brief overview of ways that we work with teachers and students and schools, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nick, who's going to talk about the Light Education Initiative and the amazing work that they do to empower teachers and students to be our next generation of humanitarians. So the Holocaust Center accomplishes our mission through organizing various public-facing programs and by working directly with teachers, students, schools, and the general public. You can see here, these are some photos of different kinds of activities that we do. And I'm gonna go over some of our primary work that we do with teachers. So our public events and guest speakers, this is a huge part of the work that we do. We organize numerous programs and events and special exhibits for the general public every year. And we often do this in collaboration with other organizations in the Pittsburgh region. And we invite you to attend and encourage you to have your students attend these events as well. When we bring scholars or exhibits to Pittsburgh, we'll often reach out to our Educator listserv and see if anyone wants to have that person come to their school. That's actually what I was doing this morning. I was with a scholar that we brought in for our Crystal Nacht event last night, and I was with her this morning where she spoke to about 60 students in 2 different sessions. We publish, as Jim mentioned, our own comic book series. It's called Chutzpah, Superheroes of the Holocaust. We have 4 volumes that feature over 20 stories about real-life upstanders from the Holocaust, many of whom settled in Pittsburgh. And we also have a teacher's resource guide and a comic book primer that provides instructional language on comic books. And we can schedule in-person or remote classroom visits with our Chutzpah project coordinator and lead artist. The Waldman Arts and Writing Competition is celebrating its 40th year this year, and it's for middle and high school students who are invited to write prose, poems, and make art, both 2D and 3D, around a designated theme of Holocaust remembrance. This year's theme is local survivors, and each school will select a teacher sponsor who oversees the school's first round of competition and then submits the school's finalists to us. And then we have our own internal round of judging. And we always hold an award ceremony in May where students receive cash prizes in the form of scholarships, and registration is already open. And please, if you have any questions about this, let me know. The registration is open for a short amount of time, and then it closes, I think, in about December. The Butterfly Project, which some of you may be aware of, is a great entry point for Holocaust education. We offer grants to teachers apply for grants, and we provide kits out to teachers. And participants receive a card with a story about a child, and then they paint a ceramic butterfly inspired by that story. And this international movement aims to paint 1.5 million butterflies to honor the 1.5 million children killed during the Holocaust. I'm really excited about this particular project. It's called the Crocus Project, and it is actually out of Ireland. It's from Holocaust Education Ireland, and it is similar to the Butterfly Project, a great early entry point for Holocaust education. The goal of this initiative is to have more than 1.5 million yellow crocuses in bloom, which will recall the stars that Jews were forced to wear under Nazi rule. And we're piloting this project this year. We are the first center in the United States to formally participate in this, and we have a few bulbs left. I actually went and purchased more because this has been such a successful initiative so far. And because it's been so successful, we plan on doing it again next year and probably expanding it. We also understand that Holocaust education has to incorporate some kind of understanding of who Jews are and what anti-Semitism is. And with that, we've developed dismantling anti-Semitism workshops that explore the questions: who are Jewish people? What is anti-Semitism? Where does it come from? Why did the Holocaust happen? And one of our educators, Noah Schoen, can visit your classroom either remotely or in person to teach students about anti-Semitism and answer questions about Judaism and the Jewish people. We also have the ability to host field trips. We have Friday mornings reserved, but we can also in the library for a classroom. However, if Fridays don't work for you, with advance notice, we can work with your schedule. And we can create sort of a bespoke field trip experience. It can consist of a tour of our exhibit, Revolving Doors, a presentation by one of our Generations speakers, and other potential elements such as a presentation by our Chutzpah comic book coordinator or Understanding Anti-Semitism. Or if you've received one of the butterfly kits, we sometimes can work in small groups and have your students paint butterflies with descendants of Holocaust survivors so they can have one-on-one conversations and more personal interaction as opposed to a formal presentation setting. And finally, I touched upon this, our Generation Speakers Bureau is composed of children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And through engaging presentations that are vetted and well-researched, our speakers share their family's personal Holocaust experience with your students. And we try to coordinate the speaker's family story to complement what you're teaching in the classroom. So for example, if you're teaching night, we have a granddaughter of a survivor who was on the death march. So it's a way to take what you are teaching in the classroom and connect it to a real family and a real person that's here in Pittsburgh. And this is probably one of our main education tools. We spoke to over 5,500 students last year in over 100 different presentations. So it's a great way to ground what you are teaching to the local community. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. This is the QR code that takes you to our website. For those here in person, I also have this very handy Educator resource guide that has links and information about all these programs I just talked about. And again, my name is Emily Loeb, and I'm on my email's there, but I'm on the staff page of the Holocaust Center, and please feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Emily. This is an exciting moment for me because years ago I came here to see Father Patrick Dubois speak from Yahad Unum, and it was an absolutely unforgettable experience. If you've never heard of Father Patrick Dubois, please look him up and his organization Yahad Unum. His work is unbelievably important in Holocaust education and just in preventing genocide in general. So I remember I came here years ago, and if anyone remembers the year, please shout it out, because I don't remember when that was. It was a while ago. But at some point today, I'm sure somebody will remember it. And I came back to my school, and I was talking to one of my administrators. His name's Dr. Brian O'Black, and he said, well, how was it? And I said, it was amazing, unforgettable, incredible. And he said, did you get one thing you can use? And I said, I got 100 things I can use, of course. And he said, great, because he said, you wouldn't believe how many educators go to professional development and they get back and someone says, well, what's the one thing you got out of it? And you struggle to think about that one thing. And it's such a breath of fresh air today because all day it's just been one thing after another, after another, after another that you can use tomorrow. So I'm so excited to be a part of this because it's just so practical. And if you're an educator here or listening online, I'm sure that you have a laundry list forming of all the books you want to introduce to your students and activities with the Holocaust Center and resources. It's just incredible. My name's Nick Haberman. I'm the coordinator of civic engagement and anti-hate education at Allegheny Intermediate Unit. I don't even have a business card with that on it yet because it's such a new position. I started August 1st. I left Shaler after 18 years in June, and it's because I was part of the founding and directing of the Light Education Initiative, which was originally part of the Holocaust Center when it was under the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh. But after 10/27/2018, there was a new organization formed called Tree of Life, Inc., the New Tree of Life, and Emily and I both work under that umbrella now together side by side with Light and the Holocaust Center to figure out how we can, of course, as Dan said earlier, make never again a reality, but also to figure out how we can support people all across southwestern Pennsylvania and beyond in dismantling anti-Semitism, countering anti-Semitism, and countering all forms of hate and identity-based violence. And I'm also associated with the Eradicate Hate Conference. So if you went to the Eradicate Hate Global Summit or have heard about it, I'm part of that. So that's why there's a ridiculous amount of logos up there, lots of different groups of people involved, and I'm really happy to share them with you today. I moved this slide right before I came up on stage because I thought it just really struck me, is that I think, again, it was Dan who said it about being an expert in the Holocaust and things like that. And the reality is, as Dan alluded to, like, there's some people that know a lot more than Dan and I, but in reality, nobody is the absolute expert. Nobody knows everything about the Holocaust because it's just too gigantic. And I remember a U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, the education's manager there, someone said, well, should we try? And she said, absolutely. She said, fear of getting it wrong should not stop us from trying. And it really hits home the point. There's no single right way to teach the Holocaust, genocide, and human rights. But of course, the end of that sentence is there's a lot of wrong ways. So the best practices presentation that I'm delivering, it's not like Nick Haberman's best practices. It's the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, it's Yad Vashem, it's USC Shoah, it's the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh and Tree of Life. You've heard of these organizations. So what I tried to create was a presentation that would bring a lot of this together to help classroom teachers and to really help people understand and implement Act 70 of 2014, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So my story starts, I'm sure like some of your stories, with a Holocaust survivor. My Holocaust survivor was named Jack. And during my first year of teaching, it was, I guess, 2006, 2007 school year. I was not Jewish. I'd never studied the Holocaust. And I found myself in a classroom being expected to be the expert in the room and being expected to speak with credibility and authority about the Holocaust, and I was panicking. Thankfully, my aunt, who is a teacher, said, you don't have to be the expert in the room for the Holocaust. There's a Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. I had never heard of it. I had never contacted them. I didn't know where it was. I knew nothing. But thankfully, if you're anywhere near southwestern Pennsylvania, you can still just pick up the phone or send an email to the Holocaust Center, and they'll take care of you. So that's what happened in 2006, 2007. They gave me a phone number of a Holocaust survivor, and they said, call him up, he'll help you out. And at that time, there were between 60 and 70 survivors in Pittsburgh that could come to your classes. Now, the story's a lot different, as we know. But I remember on the phone with Jack, I said, can you come and speak to my class? He said, I don't really want to speak to your class. I want to speak to your whole school. I want to speak to a whole grade. And that's how so many survivors functioned, is so many of them wanted to speak to as many people as they possibly could. And that was Jack. So he pushed me out of my comfort zone as a young teacher. He pretty much voluntold me to plan an assembly, which was great. He said he wanted to speak to the entire 9th grade class because in our American history classes, there's a unit on the Holocaust. And by a unit on the Holocaust, I mean a 42-minute class period. So Jack said, I'll be that 42-minute class period for you. He said, come pick me up, and then afterwards take me home. And what he did in about an hour is, it took me years to identify this, is he did what many survivors had the ability to do, is in just 5 or 10 minutes, he inspired the entire audience. In another 20 or 30 minutes, he prepared everyone to speak about his story as their story and to take his story home, to take it into the other classes. He gave his story to the audience. And Dan had a quote earlier about the witness. You are now a witness. And Father Patrick Dubois' quote was, when you walk out that door, you are a witness forever. And Elie Wiesel has all these survivors have quotes about being a witness. So Jack was preparing students and teachers to be witnesses for his family's story of loss and his story of resilience and healing. And then that last piece that's so important is he was empowering them. He was saying, you've got to do something. And he was asking questions about, do you experience bullying? Have you ever seen a swastika carved into a desk or on a textbook? Have you seen anti-Semitism? Have you seen hate speech? Have you seen someone excluded in the cafeteria, or someone being bullied for a religion that they practice or an identity that they have or something? And he was really calling the students to action. And that led me to eventually create a program, now the educational program, educational outreach program of the New Tree of Life and Holocaust Center, which is an acronym, LIGHT. It stands for Leadership Through Innovation in Genocide and Human Rights Teaching. And Emily nailed the mission to inspire, prepare, and empower the next generation of humanitarians. It's not just about knowing the facts of the Holocaust, it's about using the facts of the Holocaust to make your world better. And that's what Jack did. So I wanted to create a program that would help support educators to create student leaders that would take all those STEM skills, all those incredibly innovative skills, and apply them to the way that we teach and talk about genocide and human rights. And I wanted it to be a word you can remember, so that's why it wasn't, 18 letters long. Emily already talked about this. One of the first entry points I had into Holocaust education was the launch party, I think maybe on Liberty Avenue, for the first volume of Hutz Pow, and the creators were there, and I thought, this is it. This is the best educational resource I have ever seen to introduce the Holocaust to younger audiences. And it fits perfectly between that first thing that they've read, maybe Number the Stars, maybe one of the amazing resources we heard about today, and the later resources like a night or something. You can give it to any middle school student, you can give it to any high school student, and if you send it home, you can give it to any parent or grandparent, and it's a quick read, it's an easy read, and it's incredibly connected to the rich history of Pittsburgh. Not just the history of the Holocaust, but the history of Judaism in Pittsburgh, and the history of survivors coming here and practicing resilience and healing and creating a new life here in southwestern Pennsylvania. if you haven't seen it, talk to Emily before you leave. And if that's your one thing you take away from my presentation is to talk to Emily about chutzpah, then that's it, you're good. You can tune out for the rest of it. Especially this. I'm not going to click on the QR code. By the way, at the end of this presentation, I have a QR code for the presentation, so you don't have to take any notes or anything if you don't want to. You can just follow along and then scan the code, you got the presentation. And if you forget, you can email me and I'll send it to you. In 2014, an administrator came to me and said, there's this new thing, it's probably going to be a mandate, but we don't know. There's no money associated with it. It's not official yet, but it's called Act 70 of 2014. Public School Code of 1949, Holocaust, Genocide, Human Rights Violations Instruction. And it's a mile long, but you can see in the first paragraph, it says, to provide children with an understanding of the importance of the protection of human rights and the potential consequences of unchecked ignorance, discrimination, and persecution, it is a matter of high priority that children in this Commonwealth be educated concerning the Holocaust, genocide, and other human rights violations. Therefore, the General Assembly strongly encourages school entities in this Commonwealth to offer instruction in the Holocaust, genocide, and other human rights violations. And then it goes on and on and on. But that word strongly encourages really confused a lot of administrators at the time because they thought a mandate might be on the horizon. It still might be someday in Pennsylvania. They knew it's in standards. They knew we're supposed to teach it and talk about it, but this strongly encouraged meant that they told me to go and get trained because they said, we need people in the school district who, I mean, for lack of a better word, can help the school district check the box that they're helping to implement Act 70, that they are strongly encouraging instruction in Holocaust, genocide, human rights. So what I did is I started to come to these trainings, the Ethel Lefrak Conference, Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, do the Echoes and Reflections training, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized that there was more content than I was ever going to have time to implement, ever. That I could spend the rest of my life teaching the Holocaust, and I feel like there's a new thing every day. And I liked how Anne, wherever you are who presented before, you said that you're even saving books for retirement because there's certain books like you don't even have time to get through right now. 400 or 500 page books that you know are going to be the best book you ever read, but there's no way you can bring it into a classroom. So that's what the rest of this presentation is all about, is how do we get you leaving here with that one usable thing, whether it's new content, whether it's new opportunities, new resources, new activities, maybe it's a vision for the school year of how you want to implement this stuff. Maybe it's a safety net, just knowing that when you get that phone call and it's a voicemail and you don't really know how to respond to it because you're being called out for doing X, Y, or Z, you know that there are people in this city and many people in this room that you can call and email and say, hey, can you maybe come to this meeting, give me some talking points, let me know what is Act 70, how does this help me, how does this back me up? We've had stories of teachers in Pittsburgh being put on leave for talking about protocols of the Elders of Zion in connection to Henry Ford and the Dearborn Independent, and I mean, we've had consequences. Teachers have been suspended for teaching facts. And we need to support one another and make sure that we all are all aware of our safety nets in the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, in Tree of Life, in all of the folks in this room. Also want you to have a better understanding of the goals of Act 70 and to feel yourselves inspired, prepared, and empowered to help implement it. So the next few slides, and most of these slides, they're designed so that you could steal them and use them in your classroom. And you can see, you can even like screenshot, and there's not even logos in it. I don't care if you steal all of this. I encourage you to, and use it with your students, because whenever we started to hear about Holocaust, genocide, and human rights, if we work backwards, a lot of the students cannot name their own basic human rights. So a really fun entry point into this is asking the students, since all human beings are entitled to basic rights and fundamental freedoms, how many of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights basic rights and freedoms can you name? And this is whenever, this is our anticipatory set, this is our warm-up, this is our icebreaker, this is whenever in the next section when Emily and I run the workshop, we might dive into this a little bit And we felt it was important to have a workshop because after you get all the information, it's great to have an hour to unpack it a little bit and practice it and, you know, really figure out how you're going to implement it. So of course, students struggle to name their own basic universal human rights, and then you can introduce them, and you can also get this poster free from hreusa.org to print out for your classroom, and the students are absolutely blown away to know that they have these basic human rights and that one of them is like rest and leisure. One of them is the right to privacy, and they're like, wait a second, we're in a school, we don't have a right to privacy, and then you can, that's a 20-minute conversation. And you can see how the most important thing is to help the students see themselves in the story of the Holocaust, of genocides, of human rights violations, because then they care about it, and then they're going to do something with it. So if you, it's hard sometimes, but we know we can do it, but it's hard sometimes to help them see themselves in the story of the Holocaust, like right away, but with the human rights, they can see themselves in this story in 30 seconds, and they can get very passionate and upset about their human rights being violated by mom and dad, and grandma and principal and teacher and whatever, and I want to go to the bathroom, I have freedom of movement. No, you don't, sit down, right? Like you see where this is going, it's really fun. You can also kick into the Holocaust, what do you know? Some simple survey questions. Some of the ones that I've used in the past and I've heard from other people, how many Holocaust victims can you name? And right, like, and this is, the other side of this is, I think after the first year I taught the Holocaust, my students could name more Nazis than they could victims, and I was like, oh geez, I'm not teaching this from a very good perspective, I need to like back up. So how many Holocaust victims can you name other than Anne Frank and Elie Wiesel? Where did the Holocaust take place? And if you click on that link, it takes you to one of those beautiful USHMM maps. When did the Holocaust begin and end? How many places of incarceration were there, and what was the cause of the Holocaust? And we already saw some of the claims conference questions, so I'm not going to go into that much more. The claims conference stuff is a fascinating way to get your students really talking about the Holocaust. I think if I would pause on any question with students, like if you got to pick a, you know, one to really hit home, places of incarceration, camps, ghettos, etc. When I was getting the students in, I was teaching high school, 9 through 12, mainly 11 and 12, like grades 11 and 12, because I had a Holocaust elective. And the students were like, I know about the Holocaust. I read Night in 10th grade, half of it. And you're like, I don't think that you know oh no, I know everything. I also read Number of the Stars. And you're like, okay, how many camps were there? Can you name some? And they're like, yeah, I can name the camp. And you're like, okay. And we saw that, right? Like some of them can't even name one camp. Some of them are like, I know the one. And you're like, oh yeah? How many do you think there were? And they're like, there's more than one? Yeah, there's a lot of them. As of right this second, we know at least, at minimum, documented over 44,000. When I started teaching, it was like 3,000 or 4,000 that we knew of. And then a couple years later, I was like, oh my goodness, they think they know of 10,000. And then they got to 12,000 and 13, and then Father Patrick Dubois and others started to do a lot of work and dig through the data, and now they're up to over 44,000 documented places of incarceration. And then the students are like, oh, we're not gonna have time for all that. I know we're not. And that's where the learning gets good, because that's whenever you can say, we're not just going to dive into like every single thing here, we're gonna do a little bit of this here and there. And then, of course, Act 70 is Holocaust, genocide, and human rights, so then you can ask the questions, what about these other genocides that we're hearing about? What genocides occurred before the Holocaust? What genocides have occurred since the Holocaust? And how are genocides recognized and taught? You can introduce students to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Early Warning Project that tries to predict genocide. They publish a free book called The Fundamentals of Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention and Awareness that we're going to save till retirement because it's a big one. And it's also a pretty heavy read. Because when the students start to learn about the Holocaust and they see that there were genocides before the Holocaust, there were genocides after the Holocaust, and genocide is still, I think the stat, it's like every 2.5 years on average, we get another genocide today. It's a very real thing, and in the speaker notes, whenever you get this presentation on your own, if you're going to dive into this, you can see that you've got genocides that are recognized by some countries and not by others, and then you start to get into like who has the power and authority to recognize and name a genocide. And this is where the students are like, wait a second, there's no like world police? I thought that this was clear. I thought that after the Holocaust, we figured this out. And here we are, right? We're in a world that has seen far too many genocides, and a world that sees anti-Semitism continuing and on the rise. And we know that anti-Semitism is, they call the canary in the coal mine for all forms of hate. When anti-Semitism is on the rise, so too is all of the different forms of discrimination and identity-based violence. So again, back to this slide, nobody knows everything, and there's no single right way to do this. So where do you begin? I'm going to briefly overview Act 70, then go deeper into teaching tools and tips and resources and opportunities. So some basic historical context. I share these not to teach you, but to give you the slides that, again, some people use and adapt, because many Holocaust educators are teaching this in the context of American history. Many Holocaust educators just have a very small amount of time, so helping students to understand where the Holocaust fits into what they might already know about really helps them to see the timeline. And it helps them to see the Holocaust as an anti-Semitic moment of time on a much, much longer timeline of conflict, of anti-Semitism, before the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and after the Holocaust. And the students can also see, excuse me, the students can also see where the United Nations fits into all this, and how the United Nations tried to prevent future wars and genocides, and how the United Nations struggles to prevent future wars and genocides, and what documents exist. The Holocaust itself, you can see there, that definition is from the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, starting with a basic definition of what and when the Holocaust was. That definition has changed since I started teaching the Holocaust, and it continues to change and evolve. And that's another conversation with the students, that we're not stuck at a moment here where we're never going to discover anything else, and we're never going to hone our definitions and change and refine. Like this history is living and breathing. Whether you got one class period or 90 days to teach this, or maybe you've got a whole year, or maybe you've got 2 weeks, I think that always scratching the surface approach to tell students, like I don't mean like secretly, I mean openly tell them, hey, we are scratching the surface. We're going to focus on a few people, a few events, some major categories. We're going to do our best in the time that we have, and hopefully what you're doing as an educator is you are opening that door to Holocaust education, and the students can spend the rest of their lives learning, sharing, educating, and we know the Holocaust is also an easy door into other genocides and human rights violations, because once the students learn about the Holocaust, which is so well documented, they start to investigate other things that are happening in their world. So leaning on the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in the United States is something that I recommend to everybody. Genocide is another concept that is pretty foreign to students. So, giving them a bit of a background into before 1944, there wasn't even a word. The genocide, the word did not exist. It was coined by Raphael Lemkin, and it led to the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which established genocide as an international crime, which leads us into this book that gives us the really academic overview of how are genocides and mass atrocities defined, why do they occur, what are the tools available to policymakers to prevent genocide and mass atrocity, how can societies rebuild after genocide and mass atrocities, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're introducing these giant things, what I like to do is bring it right back to the students' lives and say, today, this week, this month, you are not going to stop a genocide, but you might stop bullying. You might stop an act of anti-Semitism. You might stop hate speech. You might make your community better and safer by your actions. So the Father Patrick Dubois quote, work at your level. So you learn the global, you learn everything, but you work and act at your level, with your sphere of influence, in your community, in your school, in your classroom. So you can definitely make your classroom free from anti-Semitism and hate speech, and you might be able to make your school community free from anti-Semitism and hate speech, or at least you will not be providing that fertile ground for anti-Semitism and hate speech to grow into something bigger. Some slides here that you can take students through just on the end of World War II, the creation of the United Nations, the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's Eleanor Roosevelt there, the champion of that. The basic overview again of the human rights violations, some definitions about human rights and human rights violations. This stuff is all here to help you to be able to teach this. Additionally, to be able to talk about how the Holocaust really paved the way for the language that we're seeing in this document. So crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, mass atrocity, mass killing, war crimes. All of these were created in connection with the Nuremberg trials. And these are the most severe human rights violations. But there are other human rights violations that the students can maybe connect to more easily, like being denied the right of freedom of expression, being denied the right of freedom of movement or asylum or religion, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, you give them that big list of human rights, and anytime one of those rights is denied, that's a human rights violation. The complete list, again, in the speaker notes for you. So you got some of the basic overview of the state of Pennsylvania. Department of Ed decided that, declared that they really encourage schools to make sure that all graduating students have a basic understanding of the Holocaust, of genocide, and human rights violations. But that doesn't mean they give you a handbook and they're like, all right, teachers, here you go. And that's why I'm standing up here and Emily's standing up here. It's up to us to figure out how we support one another and how we help one another and how we really connect it to real people. So Emily, working at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, is not just the programs and education manager, is that right? Close enough. She's also a generation speaker. So that's really what I wanted to stress is Emily has family members who survived the Holocaust, and she has family members who were killed in the Holocaust. So she can help students directly connect to this history, and she can do a much better job teaching about this than I can, because I'm just trying to find stuff here and there, but whenever I put Emily in front of a student, you can't deny that. They find it quite easy and enjoyable to deny everything they see and read, but they find it hard to deny a human being. They find it hard to deny a survivor, a child of survivor, a grandchild of survivors. So how do we begin to teach the content? Some teaching tools and tips. One of the first books I encountered about the Holocaust was Masters of Death. It's because there was a National Geographic documentary called Hitler's Hidden Holocaust, and it was on the Discovery Channel when we used to watch TV and not stream things. And I remember watching it, and I couldn't get it. I was like, I don't have a copy of this. How am I ever going to use this in my classroom? So I'm like writing down notes, and I remember the one thing I got out of it is this quote, is the guy, the author, who also was narrating this National Geographic documentary. He said, "The fact is, to study the Holocaust in any of its aspects is to be traumatized. I had nightmares. I had great difficulty dealing with this material." And here I am, a classroom teacher, and I'm like, I'm supposed to teach the Holocaust, and I'm supposed to be trauma-informed. Apparently, I can't do that. And this is something we'll talk about in the workshop. Is it possible to avoid trauma when teaching this content? Is it possible to teach the Holocaust without introducing new trauma, without sparking existing trauma, rekindling that? I try not to use the word trigger, because even if you think about the words we use to talk about trauma, it's violent imagery. Like triggering trauma, where's the word trigger come from? So even just like thinking about this, it's hard. It's difficult for educators to teach the Holocaust without the graphic stuff, because we know we've seen it, it's out there, you can get it in 2 seconds. And I'm so glad Dan talked about this. And the best lesson I ever saw on the Holocaust was from a guy named Paul Sammons, who's this legendary Holocaust Museum exhibit designer for the Imperial War Museum and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. He's done work everywhere. And he taught an entire lesson on the Holocaust with a picture of a shoe, like just that. That was the whole lesson. It was him and a shoe. And it was an observation inference lesson where you're asking people, what do you see? What can you infer? But you take a good 10 minutes on like, what do you see? And you really dive into like the repairs on the shoe, the laces, the type of shoe it is, the size of shoe it is, the style, et cetera, et cetera. And then you start to make these inferences. And the students find it hard to relate to a pile of dead bodies in a photograph, but they find it really easy to relate to a shoe because they're wearing shoes and they have shoes. And they start to ask, have I ever repaired my shoes? Has my parent ever repaired my shoes? What is the meaning of these things that we own? Because we know shoes are such a symbol of the Holocaust. So are eyeglasses. And if you've gone to the museum in DC or any of the camps, it could be a razor that you use. It could be, whatever you have a picture of, an artifact of, that can guide your entire lesson on the Holocaust in a very relatable way that is not trauma-inducing. And it makes us think about our relationship to trauma. And these next slides come out of the mind and the work of the 1027 Healing Partnership, which was tasked with being a resiliency center for the victims, family members, and survivors of the October 27, 2018 synagogue shooting at the Tree of Life that killed 11 people and affected 3 different congregations. So the 1027 Healing Partnership really centers trauma in everything they do because they're obviously trying to help people heal, and they're trying to build resiliency, and they're trying to bring back love and trust in a world that was shattered. So we think about our relationship to trauma and our students' relationship to trauma, and there used to be all these stats about how X percentage of students have experienced trauma, but then no one was, or few people I should say, were asking, what is the definition of trauma? What do you mean by trauma? And if you use vicarious trauma, 100% of your students are experiencing vicarious trauma potentially by these discussions and these conversations, and some of them have experienced primary trauma and some of them have experienced secondary trauma. So it's really important to think about our audience when we're teaching this, because again, there's no single right way to do this. So when we're thinking about our age level, the content that we have, the curriculum that we have to kind of abide by and follow, we want to think about the student's relationship to trauma and name it and talk about it. And it gives us this question, is how do we teach the Holocaust, genocide, and human rights from a trauma-informed mindset? And what the 1027 Healing Partnership stresses is healing-centered engagement, which centers repair and resiliency and highlights the ways in which trauma and healing are experienced collectively. And again, you're going to get all these slides, so I'm going to move through them quickly. The goals of this is we want to increase empathy, we want to provide hope that there is life after trauma, and that's why Hutz POW is so strong as a resource, because Hutz POW centers hope and resiliency, and also resistance. And we want to share the wealth of vicarious resilience instead of sharing that vicarious trauma. And that's not saying that we're going to tell the students stories of moments in the Holocaust that ended in these fairy tale endings, because we want to be very clear with them. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was, it was absolutely a tragic end to the story, but we also want to share some of the wealth of vicarious resilience of the people that were experiencing the Holocaust or any other genocide or human rights violation. So some definitions for the students, what is resilience? How do we maximize resilience and minimize trauma? And it's really to avoid these trying to paint students like they were there. Obviously we know simulations are always not recommended. So you never want to try to make the students feel like they're about to lose their family members and they're starving. And we want to lean on words that are called feeling words, not my definition. If you click on it, it's like a whole psychologist list, feeling words in relationships instead of these mechanical descriptions. So you can focus on words like powerless, betrayed, lonely, determined, hopeful, inspired, fortunate, daring, loved, forgiving, worried, because the students can relate to those words. And we can build hope without, this irrepressible optimism. And we can tell stories of how people overcome struggle. So the Holocaust Museum is a great resource to guide us. I am so happy. I already saw the guidelines today show up once. Maybe they showed up yesterday too. Maybe they'll show up tomorrow. These U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum guidelines that are, again, always changing and being updated and refined, they help us not just teach the Holocaust, but the Holocaust Memorial Museum is also trying to prevent genocides and human rights violations for other groups of people, to make never again a reality for all groups of people. So if you replace the word Holocaust here with other difficult things you're teaching about other genocides, other instances of human rights violations like slavery, you can see that defining the term, whatever it is step one. Step two is teaching them this terrible thing didn't have to happen. It was not inevitable. You want to avoid those simple answers to complex questions, which as teachers is hard because I guess maybe one of the differences of a veteran teacher and a rookie teacher is a veteran teacher knows when to tell the students, I don't know. And a rookie teacher's like, blah, 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 blah. No, you can't BS your way through this stuff. So you really want to avoid those simple answers to complex questions, strive for precise language, balance the perspectives that inform your study, which I failed miserably at my first year. Remember when all my students knew all these Nazis and none of the people that were, victims of it. To avoid comparisons of pain, avoid romanticizing it, contextualize it, translate stats into people, and make responsible methodological choices. And that's where we try to avoid games, avoid simulations, avoid those things that if you're not in that classroom and you hear about it, you're going to be like, that's a red flag. That's not good. That's the stuff that ends up on the news, and that's not what we want anyone to fall into the trap of. So what I'm going to show you are some examples of things I've used for some of these goals. So goal number 4, or guideline number 4, I should say, strive for precision of language. I'm not going to read this all to you, but this is an Aldous Huxley quote that at the bottom, it says, the language we use about war is inappropriate, and its inappropriateness is designed to conceal a reality so odious that we do not wish to know it. So we start to get into conversations with the students about how do we talk about, what words do we use to describe Holocaust victims or survivors? And it's like the words we use sometimes ignores the fact that these people were murdered. So sometimes we say there were so-and-so people were lost in the Holocaust. They weren't lost, they were brutally murdered. But again, some of you are teaching 5th grade Holocaust studies, 6th grade Holocaust studies, so you have to think about how you want to introduce these terms, but you still have to use precise language. Again, striving for precision of language, avoiding comparisons of pain. There's a virtual encyclopedia on the Holocaust Museum website that's really helpful so that you don't have to pretend to be the expert. You can say, the historians say, the people with PhDs say, these are the definitions. This is the language that we should use. Okay, here's a couple other guidelines. This combines 5 of them. Number 2, not inevitable. Number 7, avoid romanticizing the history. Number 8, contextualize the history. Number 9, translate stats into people. Number 10, make responsible methodological choices. And this is all about survivor testimony. So Dan again mentioned Night and Fog. Night and Fog was the first Holocaust documentary that was produced, and it is one of the most graphic documentaries you'll ever see in your life. It approaches the Holocaust like it was a crime, and it's just asking a lot of questions about like what happened here. And but since it came out in the I can't remember the exact year, late 40s, very early 50s, I believe. The numbers are way off. Like we had no idea the level of, the stats. We just didn't have a good understanding of what happened. So the question is, should you use this gigantic film if you have one class period or even a couple of weeks to teach the Holocaust, or should you just use a survivor's story? The problem with a survivor's story is it's one person's story. And one person's story is different from another person's story. So you can easily fall into this trap of students stereotyping the Holocaust when you just focus on one survivor's story because they say, well, all survivors were hidden in a basement. It's like, no, all survivors went to a death camp. No. So it's important to really, if you can and if you have the time, to introduce students to the gigantic, introduce them to these individual survivor narratives, and then kind of get them back to sitting in between so they know Jack's story and the story of other survivors and Frank Elie Wiesel, whatever. They're important to know, but that's not representative of the entire experience of the Holocaust as a whole and in general. Again, avoiding simple answers. Man's Search for Meaning is a text I've always gone to with high school students, at least the first half of it by Viktor Frankl. And his whole approach was the mere knowledge that a man was either a camp guard or a prisoner tells us pretty much nothing. Human kindness can be found in all groups, even those which, as a whole, it would be easy to condemn. So in Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about how he, as an inmate in the camps, was completely thrown off whenever he met Nazis who he perceived as good and Jews he perceived as bad, and he was trying to struggle with the fact that there were just many shades of gray. It was not black and white, it was not good and bad, it was just human beings. And whenever you start to get into that human being element of it, that's when the students can kind of get scared. And this is what Father Patrick Dubois learned when he was uncovering sites of mass shootings all throughout Eastern Europe in his research. Is he said, I learned that anyone can be a victim, and he said, I also learned that anyone can be a perpetrator. And he said that's really where it gets scary, is realizing that the Nazis were as human as anybody else. Strive to balance the perspectives that inform your study of the Holocaust. There's a series of slides here I'm going to show you. In the workshop, we might go through this a little bit more and kind of demo this as a classroom activity because we'll have a little more time. But this is a great photo to start with. Raise your hand, has anyone ever seen this photograph? And because there's some new resources that have come out about this. If you've never seen this photograph, we could spend, this is a great full class period if you ever have it. You know, you can spend 42 minutes on this, no problem, asking questions about like, you know, what do you see? And eventually the students start to point out like, that kid doesn't have any pants on. And then you can ask the question, what do you infer about that? You know, when do you never have pants on when you're a kid? You're having the time of your life, right? If you're this age and you're butt naked and you're smiling and you're fighting with people, you're probably having a good time. So then, you know, you get to the sky is blue, the grass is green, the grass is manicured, there's a pool, there's a slide, but the slide's made of wood, so maybe this is old. There's a thing in the background, it looks like a big greenhouse, but there's flowers, so it's clearly somebody cares about this yard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can, there's a lot of resources out there to help teach and talk about this, whether you want to show a film or, you know, there's podcasts about this, or you can just kind of lecture students the way through it with a little Q&A, observation, inference activity. And eventually, you know, you advance through the slides and you can show the students, look, here's the family, look how they're dressed, what do you think, what do you see? And the students start to go down this road of like, oh man, like I know where you're going with this. This is a Jewish family and they were taken, and you know, of course, as a teacher, we just try to always like surprise them, right, and make them think differently. So then you get into mom and dad, and there's a new baby, and you point out the house on a map, and this is Google Maps, and you can even take them on Google Maps and like show them around, and there's a McDonald's nowadays nearby this house, and when you zoom out, they're like, wait a second, and you pause here, and they can see like, this is Auschwitz, this is it, I know this word, and you can see that dad is actually Rudolf Hess. And that those kids were the kids of the camp commandant of Auschwitz. And on the left, you got him in 1947. On the right, you've got him with Joseph Mengele. So on the left in 1947, that means he survived World War II, and this is him at the Nuremberg trials. This is him right before his execution, April 16th, 1947. Again, there's speaker notes to help you out if you ever want to use these. And then this is a letter he wrote to his son 5 days before he was executed. And he says to his son, keep a good heart, become a person who lets himself be guided primarily by warmth and humanity, learn to think and judge for yourself responsibly, don't accept everything without criticism, and as absolutely true, the biggest mistake of my life was that I believed everything faithfully which came from the top, and I didn't dare to have the least bit of doubt about the truth of that which was presented to me. In all your undertakings, don't just let your mind speak, but listen above all to the voice in your heart. So you could flip this if you wanted. You could print that out, hand it to students, and start with that. And they'd be like, that must have been that guy must be righteous among the nations, like the guy who wrote that, right? This is what we, by introducing students through these guidelines that the Holocaust Memorial Museum provides us, we can get into some really creative Holocaust lessons that allow us to get some of those big themes in a very short amount of time, and then show them that Nazis, again, were not monsters, just as Jews did not have horns, right? Like, we're trying to break down these stereotypes. So you've got top row Hermann Goering and family on the left, Reinhard Heydrich and family in the middle, Hitler and Eva Braun on the right, bottom left, Heinrich Himmler and daughter Rudolf Hess and family in the middle, and Joseph Goebbels and family on the right-hand side. And there's a link to a contemporary news article about Rudolf Hess's daughter, talking about what it was like to be the daughter of, you know, one of these notorious Nazis. So teaching tools and tips. These are student slides that I'm not going to go through them and like teach you this basic stuff, but it's like, who enforces human rights? The answer, yeah, us, we do, they're ours. What's it mean to be a humanitarian? Some basic definitions about humanitarianism, elements to humanitarianism, an activity we designed to help students to identify humanitarians. It's called Spotlight. There's a link to it right here, where it's like students trying to think about who in their community is, a type of person that they would want to be like. And you can replace the word humanitarian. We have spotlight slides for like educators. We have spotlight slides for different months, like Black History Month, Asia, America Pacific Islander Heritage Month, et cetera, Native American Heritage Month, Hispanic American Heritage Month, and you challenge the students to lift somebody up, and it only takes a couple of minutes. And you can do this for the Holocaust as well, of like, who in the Holocaust do you want to lift up as someone who helped, as someone who was a helper? Eleanor Roosevelt stands the test of time. Her and Frances Perkins are, I think, the only two untouchable people in the test of time. Maybe in this place, I'm sure I could learn about a lot more people who are amazing, like Sister Gemma, when she was here. She stands the test of time, too. But Eleanor Roosevelt's one the students have heard of, and they can make a connection to, obviously, World War II and also the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Roberto Clemente is a really great humanitarian to highlight, and very quickly, I'm so glad somebody said this earlier, the person who took this picture of Clemente was Les Banos, and he's the subject in the first Chutz Pau story. And Les, I met at the Clemente Museum in like 2006, 2007, and he said, I was Clemente's photographer, and he talked to me all about Clemente. And at the very end of our conversation, he said to me, oh, and I was also involved a little bit in World War II, if you ever want to hear about it. And I was too young and stupid to be like, yes, you're Les Banos. And the comic hadn't come out yet, but you very quickly can connect the Holocaust to Pittsburgh sports, to Pittsburgh universities, and I say Pittsburgh as in we're in Pittsburgh right now, right? The region. You can connect the students to these stories, and since we're out this way, you also have to bring in Fred Rogers and think about who is that humanitarian that really helps us all to kind of ground ourselves. And whenever I used to teach the Holocaust to young people, I would always start with this. So when my dad died 14 years ago, I was in the funeral home, and I was a teacher, young teacher, and I saw this pamphlet. It's on the left. It was bright orange. I was like, what is this? And talking with young children about death, and I opened it up, and I'm reading it, and I'm thinking like, all right, I have children of my own. I'm going to have to talk to them about death, so Fred is helping me think about that. And I'm thinking, oh, I was somebody's child, my father's child, so I'm thinking about that. And then my students are children. I'm talking with them about death when I teach about the Holocaust. Oh, geez, I better read this pamphlet. And I pulled some quotes out for the students. Anything that is human is mentionable. Anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. It's not easy for any of us to accept that all living things, including ourselves and those we love, will die, and it's hard, of course, for us to think about this, let alone talk about it with our children. And when we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us to know that we are not alone. So one activity I've done with students, older students, is, do you have any experience with death? Let's, and it's not like stand up in front of the class and share. It's like, let's just journal. Just write down your thoughts. That's a really great teaching tip that I got early on from someone else is, don't ask the students everything that they're thinking, but let them express themselves somehow at the end of each lesson, in a journal, drawing, whatever it is, so that they can get their thoughts. And if they want to share them, that's great. And you end up with some really meaningful, beautiful conversations with students about your experiences, their experiences, losing people that they have loved, and then whenever they think about the Holocaust, and they think, wait a second, that was somebody's child, that was somebody's mother, that was somebody's grandparent, that's whenever you really start to see the learning set in. Survivors can do this in a half an hour. Teachers, it takes a little bit longer usually. So I think we just need to beg, borrow, and steal those best practices from one another to figure out what is right for your classroom. Because every classroom is different. And yours year to year, as you know, is also different. So what works this year might not work next year. Some resources and opportunities. Again, I'm just going to fly through these. You've heard of the Holocaust Center. I talked about Chutz Pau. Christina is a great person. She's not here today to reach out to about booking a guest speaker. I mentioned the 1027 Healing Partnership. They have a new speakers bureau called REACH, which is a speakers bureau of the survivors and family members of the victims of October 27, 2018, the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue, and they will send guest speakers to your schools, and you can kind of work backwards and start with contemporary anti-Semitism and end with the Holocaust. The Eradicate Hate Summit is a global summit that will help bring this together. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office has a mandate to do trainings on what is a hate crime, what is a hate incident from the Department of Justice, and I've brought them into classrooms, and there's some email addresses of 2 people you can reach out to get them to come in. Links to the big ones that you've heard of before. The VR experiences, if you're super tech savvy, there's a million things you can look at. Universal design learning, from the Waldman Project to the Butterfly Project to the Daffodil Project, et cetera, et cetera. And then I have examples of student work that I'll save for later. But I find that it's always best to just start with a sample of something that's really good. If you're going to ask the students to, paint a picture, do the Waldman competition, do a memorial, do something, whatever it is. If I just have a bunch of samples here, especially for young teachers that are like, wait, you're telling me to do a mural? What's it? There's an example. And you can email your peers to get more examples. So I told you I was going to give you the presentation. There it is. It is 3:15. I nailed it. I guess in 15 minutes we'll be upstairs. What room? 408? 2 floors up, 408. I'll see you. If not, thank you for your time. Appreciate you. I think the recording is going to stop and everything, but if anyone has questions, it's not going to take us 15 minutes to walk upstairs, so we are available, either questions for the group or individually, feel free.
It's not so much a question, but a reminder to people that